Adanna finally had what she always fought for, the salon that was once dusty, abandoned and silent. She rebuilt it with nothing but her own hands. It was full now. Money was coming in. For the first time in years, life was finally moving in the right direction. Then Mrs. Ease walked in. No smile, no greeting. What she told Adanna made her freeze in shock, and nothing would ever be the same again. Adanna stepped inside slowly, then stopped. Her chest tightened. For a moment she simply stood there, staring at what the salon had become. This was not the place she remembered, not the place filled with laughter, arguments, dryers humming loudly, and women fighting over whose turn was next. Now it smelled abandoned, dead. Dust covered almost every surface. The mirrors were dull. Cobwebs clung to the corners of the ceiling. The silence hurt the most. Adanna swallowed hard. The amount of work ahead of her suddenly felt overwhelming. She felt tired before she had even started. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, Mama Bola's old station, the empty shelves, the cracked mirror near the window. For a brief moment doubt crept into her chest. Can this place even survive anymore? She closed her eyes, took a slow breath, then another. When she opened her eyes again, the sadness was still there, but so was the stubbornness that had carried her this far. She didn't know whether this place could still survive, but she knew one thing. She would never find out if she didn't try. With that thought, she tied her wrapper tighter around her waist and started cleaning. She swept the floor first. Then she wiped the mirrors, one by one. By afternoon, sweat soaked through the back of her dress. She was tired, her back ached. Still, she did not stop. She rearranged the chairs, stacked the remaining extensions neatly, cleaned the counters, organised the combs Sarah had not stolen. By evening, the salon still didn't look good enough. It still felt empty, like the soul of the place had disappeared with Mama Bola. Adanna stood quietly in the middle of the shop, breathing heavily as she looked around. The place still looked far from what it used to be, but for the first time since Mama Bola died, it no longer looked abandoned. She exhaled softly in relief. At least now, the shop looked like something worth fighting for. Adanna wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand and slowly lowered herself into one of the chairs. Her entire body ached. The market outside was beginning to quiet down as traders prepared to close for the day. For the first time since morning, Adanna allowed herself to rest. That was when she heard footsteps approaching the shop. It was Helen. She stood in the doorway quietly, staring around the shop. Adanna sat in one of the plastic chairs near the counter, breathing heavily from exhaustion. Sweat clung to her skin, and her hands rested limply on her lap. Helen's eyes softened. "You cleaned everything yourself?" Adanna shrugged tiredly. "There was nobody else." Helen stepped further inside, her eyes slowly moving across the salon, the cleaned mirrors, the rearranged chairs, the counters that no longer looked abandoned. The silence between them was heavy. Finally, Helen said quietly, "You really want to keep this place running?" Adanna lifted her eyes to meet hers. "Yes." Helen frowned slightly. "Even after everything?" Adanna nodded slowly. "I worked too hard here to watch it die." Helen stared at her for a moment, then back at the shop. "I'll be here tomorrow morning before 8 a.m., Helen said quietly. Adanna blinked in surprise. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. Helen smiled faintly. "Maybe not," she replied, "but I want to." "If you're this determined to revive the shop," she said, "then I'll do that with you." For the first time in days, Adanna laughed. It was just a small, weak laugh. But it was real. Something warm settled quietly in her chest. She had spent most of her life learning not to expect people to stay. People left. People betrayed. People disappointed. That was how life had always been. But Helen stayed. Not because she had something to gain, not because she was forced to. She simply stayed. And somehow that small act touched Adanna more deeply than she wanted to admit. For the first time since Mama Bola died, the weight on her shoulders did not feel quite as heavy. That night Adanna called Emeka. The sound of his voice loosened something inside her chest immediately. "How was today?" he asked. She sat on the salon floor, phone pressed against her ear. "Tiring." "But—" She looked around the shop. "But the place looks better." Emeka smiled softly through the phone. "I knew you wouldn't give up." Adanna leaned her head against the wall. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she admitted quietly. "I think I'm just stubborn." Emeka laughed. "That's good. Only stubborn people survive Lagos." She smiled. Then they talked about small things: food, customers, the market, the rain. For a little while, the pressure inside her chest eased. By the time the call ended, she realized something. She always felt better after speaking to him, and that frightened her, because dependence had never ended well for her. Still. The next night she called again, and the night after that. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. At first, progress came in tiny pieces. One afternoon, a customer returned with her younger sister. Then another woman came because she had seen Adanna's work at a wedding. For a brief moment, hope returned. The salon buzzed softly again. Women laughed. The place felt alive again. Adanna allowed herself to believe things were finally changing. Maybe, just maybe, the worst was finally behind her. But Lagos had a cruel way of testing people the moment they became comfortable. And just when Adanna finally began to breathe again, something arrived that changed everything. 3 streets away, a new salon opened, and from the very first day, Adanna had a feeling that life was about to get much harder again. At first, she did not understand why. Then she saw the crowds, women gathering outside one particular building, young girls taking pictures in front of it, cars parked outside from morning till evening, people talking about it everywhere in the market. A new salon opened. They say the owner came back from abroad. I heard actresses even go there. Curiosity pulled Adanna there one afternoon. The moment she saw it, her stomach tightened. The salon looked nothing like the small neighborhood shops scattered around the market. It looked expensive, powerful, untouchable. Large glass doors reflected the busy street outside. Bright golden lights glowed inside even during daytime. Cold air from the air conditioners drifted out each time the door opened. Young workers moved around in matching black and gold uniforms, their makeup flawless, their smiles practiced and polished. Customers sat in soft cushioned chairs instead of hard plastic ones. Large flat-screen televisions played movies and music videos while women waited for their turn. Soft music filled the background. The air smelled of expensive perfume and hair products. There was free Wi-Fi, free cold drinks, a receptionist at the front desk, ring lights for customers who wanted pictures after braiding their hair, phone charging ports beside every seat. Beautiful wallpapers covered the walls. Even the mirrors looked expensive. Women laughed loudly as workers served them bottled drinks and snacks. And the hairstyles. Adanna swallowed hard. The braiders worked with unbelievable speed and precision, creating styles so neat they almost looked unreal. For the first time in a long while, Adanna felt small again. Within 2 weeks, most of those new customers Adanna got disappeared. One woman even apologized awkwardly before leaving. "They might be expensive," she admitted, "but I prefer making my hair there." Adanna smiled politely. then waited until the woman left before sitting quietly in the back room, staring at the floor until closing time. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Nobody came. Women passed by the shop without slowing down. Some looked inside, then kept walking. Gossips kept flying around. That place is finished. Since Mama Bola died, nothing works there anymore. I heard one of the workers stole everything. Who is even managing it now? Sometimes customers entered to confirm Mama Bola's demise, and left after they had. Adanna learned not to react. Instead, she adapted. She introduced discounts. Make your hair 4 times and get the 5th one free. Come with 4 friends and 1 person, braids free. She reduced prices for students, offered small discounts to mothers who brought their daughters. Sometimes she even braided little children almost for free, hoping their mothers would return later. Every customer mattered now, every single one. She went from school to school, church to church, advertising her business. Walked through the market handing out handwritten flyers. She even started doing home service again, just like the old days. And through all of it, Helen stayed beside her. Some mornings, Helen arrived before sunrise carrying stacks of handwritten flyers under her arm. Other days, she followed Adanna through crowded streets, helping her talk to women outside churches, schools, and market stalls. When Adanna got home service customers in far places, Helen sometimes went with her so they could finish faster and attend to more people in one day. There were days both of them returned to the salon exhausted, their legs aching, their clothes soaked with sweat. Still, Helen never complained, and Adanna never took it for granted. One evening, after they returned from sharing flyers under the hot afternoon sun, Adanna quietly handed Helen part of the little money they had made that day. Helen frowned immediately. "You need this money more than I do." Adanna shook her head firmly. "No," she said, "we're doing this together." Helen tried to refuse again, but Adanna wouldn't allow it. "You stayed when everyone else left," she said softly. "I'll never forget that." Helen looked at her for a moment, then smiled faintly and collected the money. From that day onward, something between them changed. They no longer felt like boss and worker. They felt like partners trying to survive the same storm together. Every morning before sunrise, they left the shop carrying small bags filled with combs, attachments, and hair products. "Good morning, Ma. Do you want to make your hair?" Sometimes women laughed, sometimes they ignored them completely, sometimes they agreed. Each customer mattered. Every naira mattered. But no matter how hard they worked, things just refused to improve properly. Some weeks were good. Then the next 2 weeks would be terrible. A customer would promise to return and never come back. Someone else would braid halfway, complain about money, and refuse to pay complete balance. Sometimes they spent transport fare moving around all day only to return with nothing. There were evenings. Adanna sat quietly in the salon after closing, staring at the small amount of money on the counter with frustration burning inside her chest. "How are we working this hard and still struggling like this?" she muttered one night. Helen sat beside her, equally exhausted. Her feet were swollen from standing all day. Still, she smiled faintly. "Because Lagos likes testing people first," she said. Adanna shook her head tiredly. "What if this never works?" Helen looked at her firmly. "Then we keep trying until it does." Adanna laughed weakly. "You always say things like it's easy." "It's not easy," Helen admitted softly. "I'm tired too." She leaned back in her chair and sighed. "But since we've already started, we can't quit again." She turned to Adanna. "It has to work someday." "And for that to happen," she said, "we have to keep working." Adanna looked at her quietly, then nodded slowly. The next morning they woke up and started again. But motivation alone does not pay bills. Hope does not buy hair products. Determination cannot settle rent. No matter how hard they pushed themselves, expenses moved faster than profits. Rent, electricity, hair products, transport, food, repairs. The little money she had saved began disappearing, slowly, then quickly. One afternoon, the salon generator stopped working. The mechanic scratched his chin after inspecting it. "It'll cost more than you expect," he said. Adanna stared at him. "How much?" When he told her, her stomach tightened. That night she sat alone in the dark salon counting crumpled notes. Not enough. Again. She called Emeka. "I'm tired," she whispered. There was silence on the other end. Then, "Come home." Adanna closed her eyes. "I can't. You don't have to carry everything alone." "I know." "Then let me help." Her voice hardened slightly. "No." Emeka sighed quietly. "Adanna, if I fail," she interrupted softly, "I want it to be my failure, not yours." Another silence. Then his voice came gently. "You're impossible." A faint smile touched her lips. "And you still keep answering my calls." "I always will." Her chest tightened. For a moment neither spoke. Then she whispered, "Thank you." After the call ended, Adanna remained seated in the dark salon, staring quietly at her phone. There was something about Emeka that unsettled her in ways she did not understand. Whenever life became too heavy, he was the first person she wanted to hear. Whenever something good happened, he was the first person she wanted to tell. And that scared her, because feelings were dangerous. Dependence was dangerous. The people she had trusted most in her life had been the ones who hurt her the deepest. So she did not know what to do with whatever she was beginning to feel for him. She only knew one thing: his voice had started feeling too much like home. Business improved briefly during festive periods. Her competition suddenly became overcrowded. Women sat for hours waiting for their turn. The salon became so busy that they increased their prices to almost twice the normal amount. Many customers could no longer afford it. And suddenly they remembered there was another good salon nearby, Mama Bola's salon. At first, Adanna expected bitterness to rise inside her whenever she saw some of those women return, but it didn't. Instead, she welcomed them warmly, like they had never left. "Welcome, Ma." "How have you been?" "You look good." Some customers looked uncomfortable when they stepped inside the salon again. Their eyes moved slowly around the room, the aging chairs, the repaired mirrors, the old counters that Adanna and Helen had worked so hard to keep clean. The salon was alive again, but only barely. One older woman sighed softly while sitting down. "It pains me seeing this place like this," she admitted quietly. "Mama Bola suffered for this shop." Another customer shook her head sadly. "She trained almost half the braiders in this market." Helen smiled weakly. "Yes," she said softly. "She really tried." Some women asked how they had been surviving. Others didn't. Some simply braided their hair and left without another word. But a few stayed longer. A few remembered. One customer held Adanna's hand after finishing her hair. "You're trying," she said. "I can see it." Adanna smiled politely. "We're doing our best." The woman looked around the salon again. "I've been coming here since before my first child was born," she said quietly. "I can't just watch Mama Bola's hard work disappear like this." Another woman nodded in agreement. "We'll start coming here more often." Adanna felt something tighten in her chest, not because of the promise itself, but because for the first time in a long while, it felt like somebody finally saw how hard she was fighting. "Thank you," she said softly, and she truly meant it. From that day onward, Adanna treated every customer carefully, not like a transaction, like someone giving the salon another chance to survive. She remembered names, asked about children, offered water whenever she could afford it. Sometimes customers came tired and left smiling simply because of how peacefully they had been treated. Slowly, little by little, people started talking about the salon again. For a few weeks, hope returned. Women laughed while gisting. Children ran between chairs. Helen hummed while braiding. Adanna worked from morning until night. Her fingers flew through hair with practiced confidence. Sometimes customers stared at her hands in amazement. "You're talented," one woman said. Adanna smiled politely, but the improvement never lasted. Once the festive season ended, the silence returned. But it was better than before. Almost all the customers returned to their favourite salon, even some that say that they'll start coming to Adanna's shop frequently. But some kept to their word and started braiding their head in Adanna's shop. One of those women was Mrs. Ease. She was elegant, soft-spoken, and always neatly dressed, with the calm confidence of someone used to being respected. The first day she returned to the salon after many months, she sat quietly for a while after Adanna finished braiding her hair. Then she smiled faintly. "Mama Bola used to insult me every time I came late," she said suddenly. Helen burst into laughter immediately. "That woman insulted everybody." Mrs. Ease laughed too. "But she loved this shop," she said softly, her eyes moving slowly around the room. "You could see it." After that day, she started coming more often. Sometimes she stayed long after her hair was done, talking with Helen about old market stories and laughing about Mama Bola's harsh mouth. Other times she simply sat quietly watching Adanna work. One afternoon she brought 2 women with her. "My colleagues," she explained. The women worked with her at a large accounting firm owned by one of the biggest companies in the state. At first they looked unsure about the old salon, but before long they relaxed, because Adanna had a way of making people comfortable. She listened when people talked. She remembered details. She treated everyone with patience and respect, no matter how rich or important they were. The women noticed it immediately, and they kept coming back. Then they brought more people. Soon Fridays became especially busy because Mrs. Ease's colleagues preferred braiding their hair before weekends. For the first time in years, money started remaining after expenses. Adanna could finally afford to buy better clothes, better food, a better phone. Sometimes she stood in front of clothing stores after work, staring at beautiful dresses displayed behind glass windows. There were moments she almost entered, but she always stopped herself, not because she didn't want those things. She did, badly, but she had seen success disappear too many times to trust temporary comfort. There was always a bigger picture in her mind. What if these customers stopped coming tomorrow? What if Mrs. Ez relocated? What if another better salon opened again? No, she refused to build her future on temporary luck, so instead of upgrading her lifestyle, she upgraded the salon, carefully, patiently, strategically. She studied her competitors closely, not with jealousy, with attention. She asked customers questions. "What do you like most about that salon?" The answers repeated themselves often. "The air conditioning. The waiting chairs are comfortable. They serve drinks. The lighting is beautiful. There's always music. They charge phones for customers. They have TVs. They make customers feel important." Adanna listened carefully. Then she started adding those things to her own salon, one after another. First came brighter lights, then a stronger generator, then cushioned chairs, then standing fans before she could finally afford air conditioners. She added a television, a small refrigerator filled with soft drinks and cold water, phone charging ports beside mirrors, beautiful wall paint, air fresheners, clean uniforms for workers, a proper reception table, a children's corner with cartoons playing quietly for restless kids. Then Mrs. Ease suggested something new. "Most salons feel cold," she said one afternoon. "Yours should feel warm." Adanna thought about that for days. After that, she trained everyone in the salon to greet customers properly, to smile, to remember names, to speak kindly even when tired. That became the difference. People didn't just come because of the hairstyles anymore. They came because of how the salon made them feel. Within 2 years, the transformation was unbelievable. The dusty, abandoned salon Mama Bola left behind disappeared completely. In its place stood one of the most respected salons in that part of Lagos. Past customers returned. Then more followed. Young girls started approaching Adanna almost every week. "Please teach me." "I want to learn from you." "I heard you're the best around here." Adanna trained them strictly, just like Mama Bola had trained her. But unlike Mama Bola, she corrected with patience, the salon kept growing, money kept increasing. But Adanna herself barely changed. She still wore simple clothes, still ate cheap food most days, still spent money carefully. Helen once shook her head while watching her count money late one night. "You know you're rich now, Abi?" Adanna laughed softly. "Not yet." But the truth was deeper than that. A part of her still feared waking up one morning and losing everything again. So she kept building, kept saving, kept working. Then one afternoon, while the salon buzzed loudly with customers and apprentices moving around, Mrs. Ease walked inside again. But this time she wasn't smiling, and she wasn't there to braid her hair. The moment Adanna saw her face, something inside her tightened immediately. Mrs. Ease walked toward her slowly. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Adanna's hands stopped moving. Something about the woman's tone made the entire salon suddenly feel colder. "What happened?" Adanna asked softly. Mrs. Ez glanced around carefully, then leaned closer, and the next words out of her mouth changed the course of Adanna's life in Lagos forever. Did Adanna finally escape the poverty and pain she fought so hard to survive? Or was everything about to collapse again? And what exactly did Mrs. Ease tell her that made her entire world stop? The answer changes everything. You do not want to miss part 6. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll be notified the moment it drops, like the video, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were in Adanna's position? Thank you for watching.